Welcome to our videos for applying for a Parks and Recreation Trust Fund grant. Again, these are our videos to guide you as you prepare your PARTF application. This video is required of all applications requesting assistance for funding for development. Development projects are eligible for new construction or renovation on property that the applicant has site control. So you must own the property or have site control where you're asking to use funds. So we'll talk about ownership and lease agreements. So those are the two options available to show that you have site control. And then you'll also need to provide an environmental review information and that data for the project site based on the proposed development. And we'll review that. And we'll also talk about if you have a school site project. Those are eligible. There are some different guidelines with that, and we'll review those. The first item as you look through the application is the attorney's certification of site control. There are three types of site control that we look at. The first is fee simple, so that's outright ownership. You have the deed to the property. The second option is a lease agreement. So perhaps you have some property that's leased as a park. Could be a long-term lease, but it must at least be for 25 plus years, because that's how long you're required to maintain the site for public recreation when it's received PARTF assistance. You can also have easement ownerships and agreements. So that's another option as well. And you'll see when your attorney fills this out, the local government name, you'll check what types of site control, if it's the entire site, or you might have different portions of the site. You might have one that you have fee simple title and another section where there's an easement on the site. So describe that here. The attorney will list any limitations or encumbrances that are on the site or check that there are none. So this gives a little more description of that. You want to make sure, if there's an easement or a use agreement. Sometimes I've known there's been parks where property's been donated, but there might be a life estate from the current owner that still lives there. So there might be a section of the property where that home is located. So that's an example where there might be an encumbrance or a limitation. Certain easements, if you have power easements, there might be limited development that can occur under some of those power line easements. Trails may work, for example, or a parking lot, but you cannot put any buildings. So those are things that need to be noted on here. And you can use an extra page. Remember, only single contiguous site projects are eligible, and the site control must be at the deadline of the grant. So the due date for the grant, that deadline of May 1st, you have to have site control at that time. That, of course, does not apply if you're submitting a grant that includes land acquisition, where you're asking PARTF for assistance in acquiring the property, or even if it's donated. So make sure the attorney completes this, types your name, title, and signature and date as you submit that. Environmental review. So that's in more detail in the application document, so make sure you look at that and know that it must be completed in its entirety. Project design should minimize adverse effects or impacts on the environmentally sensitive features of the site. We also want to remind you as you go through this, some permits can cause serious project delays. So if you're proposing a project that proposes a major bridge or a dam, we strongly encourage you to have those permits in hand prior to applying for PARTF. So if you need to wait a year and get all those in place and then apply for PARTF in the next grant cycle, that could prevent you long-term from getting delays in your project and having poor grant administration. Projects that require Department of Transportation, FERC or Federal Energy Regulatory Commission or FEMA permits, or down on the coast some CAMA permits, could have potential delays in permitting. So again, the contract will be for a 3-year period, and if some permits take longer than that, it can harm your time period to get that done. Site description, as you list that, include the park acreage, how many acres of land, how many acres of water, especially if you have a large lake, pond, what's the topography, streams, any significant natural resources that are on the site or adjacent to the site is important to know. What are past and current use of the property? Here we're looking to see, is it suitable? This is a good way for you to understand, is it suitable for a public park? What has been on that property in the past? Sometimes companies will donate property where the company has moved out. Do you have a potential brownfield situation? So look at those things before, and that's why those permits and the resources that are listed in the grant application are excellent for you to contact and check, have them check your site. Wetlands, again, there's resources for that. We want to describe any of those that are on the site. State if there are no wetlands, just put no wetlands on site, include that. Describe any floodplains that are there or adjacent to the site. You want to delineate those on a map and include that if you need to. You can always include an extra page for the environmental review. And then on this bottom of the page, have your tree and wildlife species. So again, what are the predominant species? A lot of times you can get assistance here from North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, the North Carolina Forest Service, or some communities you might have a community college nearby that has a program where those students could do it as a project or could assist you in preparing that information and getting your environmental review together. The next page, you want to look at archaeological and historic sites. It may or may not be an issue, but we recommend that you reach out to the State Historic Preservation Office to make sure they've identified the proposed project site and see if there's anything that's been in that area. So they can help you with that. On existing structures, read the instructions there. If it's more than 50 years old, you need to provide a photograph and any pertinent historical information. We also want you to indicate whether the existing structures, no matter how old they are, greater than 50 years or not, how they will be used. Do you plan to demolish those? Are you planning to renovate them for recreational use? How does that fit in with the project? And again, you can attach a separate page if needed. Utilities, we want to confirm the easements to identify if development may occur at that location. That's very important to do. List those. Ground disturbance and site clearing. How many acres will be disturbed or cleared for the project development? So what you're proposing. If you're building athletic fields, how many acres? Any part of that park. New facilities, you want to make sure if an indoor facility is proposed, how large is that footprint? Or how many square feet or ground is covered? List that here. If it's a greenway or trail that is proposed, what's the approximate length? How wide do you propose it be? And what's the surface? Is it natural surface? Are you paving? Are you doing concrete? List that information on there. All this helps in the review and also helps you be fully prepared as you get your cost estimates together and understanding the site and its suitability for a public park. And finally, you do want to list all permits that you have. It's very important if you already have those to list them or just say where you are in the status. And some applications in the past that have included these, they put a copy of the review form from, say, the Army Corps of Engineers or State Historic Preservation Office. So if you've already done that and had the letter, you can certainly include it, and that will answer any questions as this goes up to environmental review with the state. Environmental assessment. So that's important to note as well. Some projects will have to go through an additional level of evaluation called an environmental assessment. And that's not required until only if they're selected for funding. So that's usually kicked in when it's a large-scale development, say you're disturbing more than 10 acres, or you're using more than $10 million in funds, or if it has a potential detrimental environmental effect upon natural, historical, cultural resources. So those are things that might be flagged. Again, if you get funding and DPR staff determines that an assessment is needed, they will contact the applicant directly and require that would be completed prior to the contract being released. So a local government may apply for a grant to fund public recreation facilities on property owned by a public school administrative unit. So this only applies, this joint use only applies if the facility is on school property, not on city or town property. So if it's, county property, only if that property is owned by the public school administrative unit. The local government must serve as the primary sponsor of the project, so they must be the applicant. And the school system would be a secondary sponsor of the project. And only recreational facilities not generally provided at a school are eligible. Again, now details for this process are outlined in the application. If you look through those details, and also talk with your RRS consultant, they can help you. But keep in mind, on those facilities not generally provided at schools, so it depends on what type of school. So swimming pool, for example, that should always be eligible, because schools do not typically build pools. So that's a good joint project. A football field at a high school would not be eligible, but if you're building an elementary school, for example, that would be. Playgrounds are typically provided at an elementary school, so that would not be an eligible facility to be funded. So again, talk to your consultant about that, your recreation resources consultant, and we can help you work through those details if you're planning for a joint use agreement. The other part of this is that a local government and a school system must include an executed joint use agreement with this application. So the two parties have come together and have a joint use agreement, and it's been executed. You're not waiting on funding. It's already in place. So this should be reviewed by the PARTF staff before an application can be considered for funding. So if you have that and you're working on that, go ahead and send it to us. But it would be submitted with the application. And RRS can always provide a sample of a joint use agreement if you want to see some what else has been used around the state. So there's a lot of great communities that do these collaborative projects. Again, review the detailed process that's outlined in the application. Thank you. This concludes our third video on development projects. We have 2 more videos. If you're doing acquisition, please watch that video, and then everyone should watch the scoring system and definitions video. And again, for any assistance, go to go.ncsu.edu/RRS and contact your regional consultant. Thank you.